A survey on the state of ransomware in Singapore reveals that organizations are now more likely to pay the ransom as opposed to recovering their data using backups. The study conducted by global security firm Sophos included 165 IT professionals here in Singapore out of 5,000 across 14 countries. About 2 in 3 Singaporean organizations were hit by ransomware in the past 12 months, and this is down from the previous year's figure of 84%, but it's still higher than the global average of nearly 60%. Another key finding for Singapore: for the first time in 5 years, the report shows that organizations are more likely to recover data by paying the ransom rather than using backups. Globally, backups are the most common method used in 68% of encryption events. 32 respondents whose organization paid up shared this, and the mean amount is more than 2.1 million Singapore dollars. The global average is close to 5.4 million. Now, the eventual amount paid was, on average, 77% of the initial demand. But organizations are getting faster at recovering from attacks. More than 3 in 4 fully recovered within a week. And this is up from the previous figure of 43%. Now, for more, we have Aaron Bugal. He's Field Chief Technology Officer, Asia Pacific, from global security firm Sophos. He joins us now from Melbourne in Australia. Mr. Bugal, thank you for joining us first off. Singapore organizations, they're more likely to pay up that ransom rather than recover that data using backup systems. Why is that?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on this evening. So it's interesting to see that organizations would default to paying a ransom. And this is attributed to the fact that attackers, once they're inside and before they release their ransomware, they are actually successfully being able to tamper with organizations' backup systems, making them poisoned and creating distrust in the backups that have been already taken. So this leaves organizations no choice but to play ball with the cyber criminals and pay up with a couple of outcomes, hopefully, that they desire. One of these is that they hope that their data that has been compromised and potentially lost and leaked isn't publicly disclosed. And although hope is not a strategy, this is probably one of the biggest reasons why we're seeing more organizations pay the ransom rather than taking an alternative method to restore their data.
Right, Mr. Bugal, so they've been targeted, they've paid up that ransom, but are they exposing themselves to even more attacks like that in future?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like the CNA has said previously, just prior in this program itself, paying the ransom doesn't necessarily guarantee A, getting your data back, and B, being left alone by cyber criminals. In fact, it does wave a big white flag to suggest that you are malleable enough and that your planning against cyber threats is probably not adequate enough and is going to allow more attention to be focused in your way because you're good for the money. And in fact, we're seeing this in other parts of the world where organizations who have agreed to pay the ransom. A healthcare provider in the United States paid $22 million recently to a cyber criminal organization as a result of ransomware. But then another ransomware operator appeared out of nowhere and claimed that they too had data of this same victim and was demanding a ransom payment as well. So who's not to say that, double, triple, even quadruple extortion could happen if paying the ransom becomes the norm. This is something that needs to be decided upon well and truly before a breach is experienced.
Yeah, startling to consider that, and also sobering, the numbers that we're looking at. About 2 in 3 Singaporean organizations hit by ransomware in the past 12 months alone. How do those statistics stack up against what we're seeing in the rest of the world, Mr. Bugal?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, like the global average of like around 2/3 of organizations that we speak to, just that statistic alone, 2/3 of organizations have experienced some sort of ransomware attack. And we really need to sort of start to take consideration into the ransomware attack is one of the penultimate phases of a successful cyber attack by a criminal. It's then that extortion that is that final blow to the victim. But well and truly before that, these organizations have been suffering breaches through exposed vulnerabilities, compromised credentials, emails getting into their environment, and allowing these criminals to come in and take stock of information that might be sitting around and then determine a best course of extortion through ransomware and other means.
Mr. Bugal, I suppose it's fair to say that all companies might be they have the potential to be targeted at one point or another, but are there systems in organizations that are especially vulnerable to ransomware attacks? And if that were the case, would they need greater protection against cyber criminals?
Yeah, it's interesting. We saw in the manufacturing, especially in the critical infrastructure vertical, that exploited devices that had been put in place for a considerable amount of time that had fallen out of maintenance schedules and cycles were unfortunately left open with pretty critical vulnerabilities, of which cyber criminals have been able to then weaponize and exploit and use them as a base of operations to further their lateral movement into organizations. So from an organization standpoint, critical infrastructure might be seen as oil, gas, electricity, and water. It's very important to look at your own organization and consider what infrastructure is critical to you and your business, and understand that that needs to be folded into a rigorous and consistent evaluation of its overall health and posture. And if it needs maintenance, that maintenance must be considered to be applied as soon as possible if it is in fact, acting as a security gateway or a device that could allow remote access. Simply gaining visibility into these systems can help sidestep a lot of these issues, but all and sundry, exploitation of devices is seen as a pretty big entry point for cyber criminals.
Yeah, it's a challenging problem to tackle. Mr. Bugal, thank you very much for your thoughts this evening. Aaron Bugal there from global security agency Sophos.